Welcome to this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Today's conversation will be about Martin Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street. The Wolf of Wall Street is an adapted screenplay by Terrence Winter based on the book by Jordan Belfort. And to say it's a story of excess would be selling it short. It tracks Jordan Belfort, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, from his rise from a stock helper to a certified stockbroker to out of work to a penny stockbroker to a managing partner in Stratton Oakmont, which is fueled by sex, drugs, and fraud. And it leads basically his life and the lives of his partners into a huge quagmire when the government starts sniffing around looking for answers. And eventually Belfort reaches that conclusion when he is sentenced to a short term in jail. I'm going to bring in my co-host now. I think right away when we talk about Wolf of Wall Street, I want to talk about one of the early scenes with Mark Hanna, played by Matthew McConaughey, and a young Jordan Belfort. They're having lunch, and McConaughey is essentially telling Jordan what he needs to do to be successful on Wall Street. Are you like me saying that conversation set the tone for the film that followed?
Yeah, because before that, that's why this movie, like you said, it's set very early. The rest of this movie is you're going to see what was advertised. You're going to see the debauchery. You're going to see the drug use. You're going to see this. You're going to see that crazy amount of sexual content, all because of what Mark Hanna says, that this is what it's like in this business.
But then it's not really laid out that you're going to get that debauchery, because he does say, okay, definitely you'll need to survive on coke and hookers. But what Jordan Belfort, I think the character always wants to outdo someone, and he figures early on that he needs to do more than Mark Hanna. So even when he goes to penny stocks, he does use a lot of the principles he learns from that Hanna discussion, but then he takes them to the 10th degree and becomes a totally different kind of ripe animal in this world, and he becomes arguably more successful than Mark Hanna ever was.
Well, yeah, unless you consider the real story behind it, where according to the IMDb trivia, that the Mark Hanna did actually buy into Stratton Oakmont, so they did end up working together later on. But I think it's clear what he did take what he learned from Mark Hanna and expand upon it. So I think that's true in both sense.
Absolutely. I think another key partnership in the Wolf of Wall Street plot is the introduction of Donnie, Jonah Hill's character, who meets Jordan in a cafe. He knows he lives in the same building, is impressed by the car, and basically makes a plea to say that he would quit his job to work for him. Now, if you're Jordan, why would you even take an interest in hiring Donnie? Because, if I'm wrong, he didn't show... I don't think we ever find out what his qualifications are, what he did previously. Why do you think Jordan took a risk on Donnie?
Well, because they did mention he sold children's furniture. That's obviously that translates very well into the world of penny stock boiler rooms. Yeah, but I think it's clear that Donnie's character was supposed to be the prototype for the type of people he did hire, or as I think some commentators mentioned that his workers were the real sheep, and they were the sheep because they followed what he said, obviously, and what he liked to hire was young, hungry people who are willing to do anything to make a dollar. And I think because he could feel like he projected himself onto his workers, and I think Donnie was an example of that by telling him, okay, you got to use this script, and you got to make sure that you get as much money out of these, like at first garbage men and later rich people, as you can at any cost. So throw ethics out the window. It's all about making the dollar, because he wants the hungriest people possible.
There's a stench of desperation in, I think, any of the hires, and I think Donnie right away willing to throw his stability. He has a wife, he has a furniture business, as you just mentioned, but he has that desperation and the desperate nature. And I think definitely when you go later on into the film and he's making these extravagant speeches, these people are soaking it in because they're so desperate, and that Jordan has given them the chance that they cannot turn him down now. when they've gotten so successful on his back.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Then let's talk about the success. This movie, we did talk about this. A lot of drug use, a lot of ethical breaches, to say the least. Do you think this movie does enough to envision the pitfalls that happen as a result of that, or does it glorify this type of lifestyle?
It's an interesting question because I think a big criticism of Wolf of Wall Street has been that it's glorifying a attitude and a way of life that has now. This takes place in the mid '80s, early '90s, but you could see even in the late 2000s recession, you had the similar branches of people getting rich without consequences. But now I can always say that in a Martin Scorsese movie that sure, violence, sex may be glorified, but it doesn't come consequence-free. So many people will say, okay, it's a lot of flash in the pan, and all I'm seeing is the drug use and the sexual orgies and all that sort. But I think it definitely still has a commentary on the type of people. You may they may seem super successful, but they're really broken people inside. And Jordan's not a fantastic person. Donnie is not a great person. These are broken people, and I think that's what the commentary is going to be. These are broken people who have been vaulted into such positions of power that you don't feel so bad for them, but you can understand why they've reached this point and those limits.
And then this movie does take place in the 80s, 90s, as you mentioned. And the real life Belfort did mention his tactics were inspired by the movie Wall Street, of course, and Gordon Gekko. So this is a weird example of life imitating art and then art imitating life. So it all comes full circle with this movie.
And the benefit of this movie is it didn't have Daryl Hannah in it. So
yes, I'm pretty sure we won't see Daryl Hannah appear in a movie like this for a long time. Not that came out wrong against Daryl Hannah, but the point being.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
The Academy has shown its light on Leonardo DiCaprio, who is getting a leading actor nomination, and I want to mention that Leo, in this case, since Jordan is so tied to drug use, it's a very physical performance. Some of his best scenes are when he's limited physically. He can't move his legs, or he's having trouble, even walking. How impressed were you by, I guess, Leonardo's physical performance in this film?
I think it was really different from any other DiCaprio movie we've seen. I mean, even DiCaprio in Scorsese movies where he plays very, more down and more down to earth performance. This performance was very surreal, and the movie Scorsese made was very surreal, so I think it fit very well. It
was more of an energetic performance. I know what you say. The Scorsese DiCaprio has been more of a obsessive DiCaprio character. Whether they're being obsessing over their life in Aviator, or what their stance is in Gangs of New York. But it was much more of an energetic performance, and I think that's why I mentioned. I think it was a really great physical performance by DiCaprio. I guess maybe The Star is Born is thrown out a lot, but you had Margot Robbie in this film playing Jordan Belfort's wife. How do you classify her? Is she somebody that you look forward to seeing in other projects, or is that simply, a right film? Is she somebody who's just a stunner, or does she have some sort of substance and a style of acting that you would look forward to seeing elsewhere?
The way I look at her role in a movie like this is that this is her arrival to most of the world, and it fit within the role and fit within this movie very well. She's supposed to be this unattainable beauty that only somebody like Jordan Belfort could get, and she does play this role very well. And if she wants to branch out, just like DiCaprio did early on, DiCaprio was only known as the pretty boy before, and now he's obviously taken a diverse catalog of roles. So I could see a future for different types of roles and not just quote unquote trophy wife, as many will call her.
Yeah, she really impressed me in the latter third of the film. her confrontation with Jordan played, both harmed wife, but also somebody who stood on her own 2 feet and took a stand. So that's something I'm going to look forward to in other roles she does. Any other comments on acting performances?
Well, Jonah Hill's performance definitely nominated for an Academy Award. The only thing I'm going to say about that is, like, out of, like, any movie character I've seen for the last, like, 5-10 years, I can't think of anybody more unlikable than Donnie's character in this movie. I know everyone in this movie is supposed to be kind of unlikable, but Donnie's character, like, it seemed like he was just riding the coattails of Jordan, and he had all the annoyances that you saw in Jordan. So I just didn't. Maybe I'm missing something here, but all I was seeing was a very, very annoying man on the screen.
See, that's interesting. I that when Hill portrays, similar to what he did in Moneyball, these characters he creates, they're characters in search of attention or love. So I think he's doing awful things and he's an awful character, but the underlying tone of the performance I think is still being accepted, being loved. Jonah Hill has had that famous when he shrunk his body weight and became somebody else, but he's more back to his normal size, and he plays that that outsider, that that selfless, ugly person who's just seeking acceptance. And I think that's a lot of the success he has in being Jordan Belfort's sidekick here. It's he's an awful person, but he's an awful person looking for love or looking for the acceptance of Jordan. Any Martin Scorsese film, and once again Martin's been nominated here, has the stylistic tics. And right away I noticed in this one is that when he was filming scenes where the guys are, high off their heads, that's filmed differently. But when they're, conscious and clairvoyant, that's filmed differently. How impressed were you? And one of the criticisms of the Scorsese film was that it was 4 hours and they had to trend it down to 3 hours. How impressed were you with Scorsese's ability to take what could have been a bloated piece of work and kind of trim it into 3 hours that moved fairly quickly? I never found myself looking at my watch. I found pretty entertained throughout.
I think it has credit to do with that this is very different than most Scorsese movies. So he changed his way of storytelling, and he introduced the sort of Zach Morris narrator for Jordan Belfort. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it showed like it may be a cheap way, but it's
something he's used in Goodfellas and Casino.
Yeah, but it was different that the Jordan Belfort character actually turned to the camera and talked directly to the audience. Okay. You could say that may be a cheap way to do something to connect with the audience, but I think it worked in this movie.
What about the runtime? Do you think that they were able to edit it down, or would you feel that it was still too long?
I honestly didn't feel like it was too long. Maybe because I remembered everything from the movie. Like it didn't feel like there was anything that could have been cut out, and most of the scenes were fairly entertaining to the general audience. Maybe too entertaining.
All right, we're almost nearing the end of this edition of In Studio, and like always, we like to end with questions. So ask, what was your favorite moment in The Wolf of Wall Street?
I think my favorite moment is when he talks about how his friend Brad dies at the age of 35, and I think it was a good punctuation point mark at the end of what's supposed to be a very happy time in his life. I mean, he's just got all his money, and he looks like he's not getting evicted. But then he finds out his friend died, and after that, life starts to suddenly unravel, where he finds out his wife's leaving him, and then you get that great scene like you mentioned before with where they have that confrontation, and it's very, 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 very raw in a movie that's very, very surreal and to the opposite of that. So I think it was a great way to lead up to that scene.
You're stealing my thunder. That is my favorite moment. The confrontation between Jordan and Naomi, I think is played really well by Margot Robbie and Leonardo DiCaprio. It starts with a scene when they're, Jordan's pushing himself on Naomi, but then it ends with, an almost maddening chase and these two characters falling apart, trying to put things together. I thought it was a really great 10 to 12 minute scene and kind of, brought things down from that, the surreal, over the top kind of lifestyle. Okay, our least favorite moments in The Wolf of Wall Street.
I think my least favorite moment is gonna have to be that flight to Switzerland. I think it didn't add. It was a still entertaining scene like I mentioned before, but it didn't add too much to the characters of the plot because we already knew these characters were degenerates. So having a scene where they go on a plane and act like degenerates probably didn't add too much for the overall story.
And I'm gonna choose the Jean Dujardin character, the Swiss banker. Like very comical character. I understand that kind of fits into like all these guys are, comics and really not serious or significant people, but I thought it was too much and I didn't really enjoy the plot line and how in the end the Swiss banker cost them everything. I know I like Jean Dujardin, but I think this role was not well played or well characterized. Okay, the last thing we like to do is word association. So when you think The Wolf of Wall Street, what word do you think of?
Ludes.
Ludes, and I'm going to go Quaaludes. So we both thought of the same word. Ludes and Quaaludes. That is this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Thank you.